As always, it is my pleasure to be joined by Jason Brooks of Buckhalter. Jason and I have talked a lot about opportunity zones lately, and we thought it might be worthwhile to go a little bit of a different topic. Between legislation and opportunity zones, those have been the things that have kept us busy for the last 6 months, helping people plan and strategize on what to do. And in light of all the changes in the marketplace, we really thought that talking about the different ways that you can use real estate to retire, as well as what do you do if you've owned real estate a really long time and you'd like to retire from it, what are some of the best strategies? So Jason and I have put together a lot of stuff to try to cover today in an hour, and we will do our best. But I thought that it might be perfect to start with a little bit. Oh, Cyrus can't hear me. And can everybody hear me now? Jason?
Yes, I can hear you.
Could you hear me before?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Cyrus, turn up your volume. Thank you. But what we will do is to start just with a little market commentary. We've obviously seen a lot of changes in the last 60 to 90 days with interest rates. And there's been a lot of optimism and hope that rents would grow and everything would be fine and real estate's going to just stay the same all the way through it. I thought, Jason, maybe we'll start with you. You work with a variety of clients across the country, from the residential market all the way through all types of commercial. What are you and your clients seeing in the marketplace today, and how has it changed over the last 90 days?
Well, I think deals over the last 90 days have gotten a little bit more difficult, Justin, as the interest rates are starting to move, but it's also creating a fair amount of opportunity. And I think that, you're starting to see some retrading of pricing on larger deals. We've seen some lenders potentially say that they're, not going to be in the market or try to pull term sheets. We've had some issues there, but then I've also seen, opportunities start to pop up. Cap rates are starting to rise on purchase opportunities in certain product types, but then again on, still on multifamily, cap rates tend to be holding and they're not, shifting too much. And the rent increases have been fantastic opportunities. I've seen some single family residential opportunities or apartment buildings. A friend of ours lives in an apartment building in Orange County. Their rent was $2,400 a month. It's under 15 years old, and they just got an $800 a month rent increase as their rent's expiring. And the landlord said, well, if you don't want to pay it, we've rented the last 5 out of your same unit type at that number. So, it's a really interesting time where rents are still rising. There's still a demand. And I think as mortgage interest rates rise, especially on single family homes, you're going to see a lot more people wanting to rent again, right? There's a lot of people trying to buy. And now if mortgage rates on single family homes go into the upper 6s, low 7s, which they might be before the end of the year, you're going to see an increase in demand for rentals.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've got 2 points. One is good news. One is bad news. And now I've just forgotten what the good news was going to be, but I clearly remember the bad news. I'll start with the bad news, I guess. As people are talking about rents. Going back to the single family, we had somebody join us a couple days ago at our company event to talk a little bit about where they were seeing the market. And as they looked at different markets, things they mentioned was the single family and 2 to 4 unit marketplaces that related to interest rates was probably the worst place. And I think that kind of supports Jason's observation that the single family housing market with where rates are at are going to push people back into the renter pool, which should be good for multifamily owners. Converse side of that, and this applies to everybody, that in order to, let's say, outperform a 1% interest rate increase, rents are going to have to, NOIs, not rent, NOI needs to increase by 17%. So for a lot of people looking at where the market's at and what they want to do, your expectation has got to be that you can really significantly increase rents in the well into double digits range in order to keep pace with growing interest rates to maintain, pricing stability, I guess you would call it.
Well, Justin, one interesting thing too that we heard both, at your team event from a lender, and then I was talking to a fairly large agency lender today, is there are actually on the commercial side a lot of lenders that were given goals for the year and budgets for the year of the amount of money that they had to lend out. And agency is all of a sudden competitive because agency has just chopped their spread substantially. Agency Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac deals are now back down supposedly in the 4.5% range. 10 years fixed, 10 years IO, because most agency lenders are so far behind on their quota that they're required to hit for the year, the budgeted amount of money that they need to lend out, that they just need to lend it out. They're loosening borrower requirements, they're loosening credit requirements, and just trying to get deals done and funded because they're so far behind. So that might create some decent lending opportunities in the coming, 3 to 4 months as they try to hit budget and get the money out in the lending world. So,
Jason, I'd actually say that I think it's probably more near term than 3 to 4 months. I don't think that's going to last forever as rates continue to increase. And I think that a lot of what we're going to end up talking today is about timing and being quick to decide on what is the best action. And the longer that you take sitting and waiting and seeing and watching and maybe doing nothing, the more impact it can have on you. And whether that means in the next 3 to 4 months as it relates to a piece of property you have, or waiting too long because you've owned one for 20 years when maybe you could have done something at 3 or 4. It's really about what can you do and staying on top of it. I think our first poll question up. And we're going to put our first poll question up because I think that in my experience, the answer, there's really kind of 2 answers that most people who own property typically fall into. And it's either the fix it and forget it, or I'll wait and deal with it when I retire. And that costs people millions and millions of dollars. We're going to get to another poll question down the road, which is, when do you think you will retire? When do you think you will retire? And when would you like to retire? And the whole point of today's webinar is to get you to retire closer to when you want to versus when you think you'll have to. So we're going to get into the content and the things we've put together. We've got a bunch of different strategies. Jason and I will make some comments, maybe tell an occasional deal story of a variety of different things that you can do. What we're going to start with is somebody who wants to currently use their real estate to retire faster. And we got a couple different strategies of the things that we think are maybe best practices of the people we work with, what they do to get to that point faster, either to retire for themselves or to create multi-generational wealth for their families. And then after we go through a couple slides there, we'll talk about all the different ways that if you'd like to retire from your current piece of real estate, what you can do to tap into your cash, to make things easier, all that sort of stuff. We'll hit these pretty quick. If you have questions, ask them via the chat. Please participate in the poll question so we can make sure that we tailor all of the commentary as we go forward to what you're looking for. And let's get started, Jason. So using real estate to retire faster. Obviously, Jason's a real estate attorney. He works with a ton of different people. Jason, we'll talk here, and maybe you can weigh in a second on some of the things that people can do as it relates to their documents to actively manage their revenue stream. One of the things that we found over 23 years and thousands of meetings with people who own $1 to $20 million property is that 90% of private clients, so Main Street, mom and pop, 1 to 10 building owners, have a gross scheduled income that is 10% or more below market rent. And we do that because we propose a lot of buildings. We look at a lot of income streams, and that is one of the most significant ways that you can increase the value of your real estate, build up more equity, get to your retirement faster. We got a couple suggestions on the income side. One is meet with professionals like the advisors at Centennial. Investment real estate brokers collect a lot of information about where the market rent is at. And it comes from a different perspective than your property manager or your management company that may be trying to manage the building to be full. The information and the data we collect look at what is the top of the market, what are people doing to get those sort of rents. And so investment real estate advisors, like everybody at Centennial, has a lot of great information that you can utilize to figure out exactly what you can get for the type of space that you have. The next thing you can do is changing space demands and demographics to make sure that you are offering the amenities that drive rents. Just in the last 5 years, the things that are adding dollars to an income stream on commercial property and multifamily is significant change. And then Jason, why don't you talk about this? are your lease agreements the most conducive to landlord flexibility to increase rent? Jason's done a lot of work with a lot of owners that have been hamstrung by legislation or a poorly written lease that was drafted by, let's call it, the tenant's attorney. And so, Jason, talk a little bit about some of the ways that people can manage their documents a little bit better to have more flexibility to increase rent.
There's a couple different options we have in this situation, right? So you can put in clauses that require annual renewals to keep people from rolling month to month, and that the annual renewals are at the discretion of the owner. And, the owner has the right to increase their rents, in that annual renewal process. So that gives you a chance to really make sure and remind yourself that every year you're going to get yourself the full maximum rent increase if you're a AB 1482 building. The other thing is, in other rent control areas, and as we see more rent control come in, is rent control generally oversees your base rent. And so if you have a lease that's structured in a way where you have a base rent and a base lease with addendums, right, where you're charging for parking, if that's allowed in cities, or you're charging for utilities and pets and other items like that, having a lease that's well worded and well written allows you the flexibility as the owner to continue to add and subtract and enforce your rights in a more efficient manner. And I think that leads Justin into the expense portion really well also, because many people focus when they're looking at NOI on how much can I increase my rent, but there's also a lot of ways to save on expenses that also increases your NOI, right? Both are an increase of rent by $1 and a decrease in expense by $1 are both $1 that go to the bottom line. They both affect the NOI. So can you generate, additional income by taking the, utilities off of your plate and putting it on the tenants through a RUB system? If you have washer dryer hookups, can you offer washer dryer rentals? Generally a stacked washer dryer costs about $250 to buy, and you can get anywhere between 50 and $125 a month to rent them out. That's a pretty good return on investment if, just in the first couple of months you get your money back, and then it's all profit after that.
Yeah, those are some great suggestions. There's a couple others on there that we'd also say you probably want to consider as you're actively managing your revenue stream, which the bigger revenue you got, the more the property is worth, the more equity you've got in it, the more you can utilize that equity to grow your portfolio. I talked a little bit about getting together with an advisor to talk about what rents should and could be, but also what are the expenses, kind of the market expenses for a building that's my typical size. A lot of owners don't know that information. They don't know the square footage of their units or their suite spaces, and the size of the offices and how that might change and be more attractive. Those things can certainly help. And then on the expense side, we hear a lot of people say that they can't do anything with their loan because they've got a prepay. Well, oftentimes a 1 or 2% prepay can be made up in reduced payments in 12 to 24 months, and then the extra year or 3 years worth of fixed payment period is going to all go to the bottom line. So lots of options there on actively managing the revenue stream. We think it's a critical thing that, as we said, 90% of our clients are not maximizing their revenue stream. And if you add that up over a 20 or 40 year ownership period, it adds up to a lot of dollars that could then be capitalized to control a much larger portion of real estate, more income, more to leave to the family, all those great things. Next one, refi and buy. Jason, you want to cover this? I know you've got a couple clients who love this strategy. It's not necessarily the one that the broker always loves, but when it makes sense, it makes sense, and when it's the right thing to do. And there's a lot of very large investors out there who employ this one to grow their portfolio instead of just trying to pay off the one asset they have.
Right. So the refi and buy strategy is actually how many of the larger, more successful real estate investors have been able to grow their portfolios over the years. So they'll go in and they'll buy their first building and they'll work hard to decrease expenses, increase rents. And all of a sudden, the building that they bought at a 4 cap really to them is now a 6 or a 7 cap, but the lender's willing to lend to them at a 4 cap. So they're able to go in and pull out a substantial amount of equity. They'll continue to have probably about the same cash flow that they had as when they bought the building originally with this new loan, but they're able to pull out a ton of equity proceeds. Now, pulling out equity proceeds in a refinance is a tax-free event. And so they're able to take all that money tax-free and go and buy a second building and do the same thing over again and improve it and grow it. And then over time, they'll refinance that one or refinance both of them as, interest rates potentially continue to go down or their NOI continues to grow, and they'll refinance out and pull additional money and go buy a third building. Many people have used this as a very effective strategy, Justin, over time to grow their portfolio quickly. And especially if you have cash in the coming, months, if the market slows down a bit, cap rates go higher. When the market catches back up, you're going to have bought a building at a higher cap rate. You're going to be able to finance it at a lower cap rate and pull out a substantial amount of money.
That's a great point. I'm going to add to that just that right now, with the way California works in Prop 13, it's a really effective strategy, sometimes more effective in California because you've got basically your fixed property tax cost at the value that you pay. Should California change that? Should we see some sort of split roll and proposals now or any property above $4 million? The refi and buy strategy does lock in the lower property taxes on some of your assets versus the 1031 exchange. Want to go to the next one? So then the other side of the coin is the 1031 exchange. You take all the equity that you have in the property versus, let's call it half of it, and you redeploy it into another asset. We do a lot of this. Those of you that have seen our proposals have seen us run both the refi and buy strategy, compare it to a 1031 scenario. And oftentimes the 1031 strategy actually puts more money into your pocket. It's basically a trade similar to a stock. You want to sell Apple, you want to buy Tesla. They let you do it as long as you reinvest the capital gains. It's similar here. You want to sell an apartment, buy a Chick-fil-A, you can do it. You want to sell an office building, buy a pistachio farm, you can do it. You got to get the exchange done in a certain period of time, which we've done over 1,000 of them in our careers, helping investors move equity around into something that makes them happier and better for the go forward. Jason, any comments here you want to touch on maybe the tax benefits and all that for those that don't know?
Yeah, I think the biggest tax benefit, right, of the 1031 exchange is that you're deferring all your capital gains. Now, remember, many people think that, I'm never going to pay tax. No, it's called a 1031 tax deferred exchange. There's no tax avoidance plans. But we'll talk about how over time you can get step up in basis for your family when you're holding the property, some other things that can go on. But you are just deferring your capital gains, which is nice. And, you have to replace all your equity and all of your debt in the next deal. But if you've built a substantial amount of equity over time, let's say you bought the property 20 years ago and you've made a lot of money, it's a way to buy something bigger, maybe newer, maybe better. I know Justin likes the phrase gritty to pretty. You might take an older building now and buy something newer and nicer, and you're not paying any tax on, the proceeds that you've made so far to this point. Also, I guess, Justin, one of the things to keep in mind is if you buy something larger and you take on more debt, you create more depreciation for yourself too, which will offset your taxes or your cash flow.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the positive benefits of depreciation in a slide or two. But when we talk about, how does somebody grow a portfolio? One of the ways to do it is to be thoughtful about using the maximum amount of leverage that makes sense to generate additional income for property. And it's one of those things where rates are still relatively really low historically. I can tell stories of when they were higher, and people a little older than I can tell stories of when it might have been double or triple. So they're still relatively low. We've seen a lot of equity buildup because, as Jason described the rent story earlier, when owners haven't been prohibited from increasing rents, and this goes across all products. We've seen significant rent growth over the last few years as demand for space, whether it be residential or commercial, has far exceeded the amount of supply. So, people who maximize leverage, which we work with a lot of investors that are trying to grow a portfolio as fast as they can, will utilize maximum leverage to take advantage of small increases in value, which significantly increase the equity. If you've got a situation where, let's say, you got 20%, 25% down, every amount you're kind of 4-timesing that because only 25% of the money originally in the deal was yours. Also, looking for seller carry deals is something we see from somebody who is looking to maximize their leverage and grow their portfolio. Usually these investors aren't so focused on cash flow at the moment because they have, let's call it other ways to cover their personal expenses. And they're looking to build the largest portfolio they can over a certain period of time so that when they retire, they've got the largest footprint of square footage. From blue states to red states. Oh, I mean, blue cities to red cities. Jason, you want to talk a little bit about this one?
Sure. So what Justin's referring to is, conservative cities versus more liberal cities and how it affects your ability to operate and own real estate. So I'll give you guys, a couple examples, and many of you are probably going through this. If you own an LA City RSO property, you will now be approaching, in the next 6 months, your third year of not being able to increase your rents. And you have 8% annual inflation or 8% inflation going on right now. In your measly 3% allowance of rate increases has been stopped. Your expenses have gone up substantially, and yet you're not able to do anything. You can't even evict a tenant really right now in LA still, versus places like Orange County, where you can do, many cities in Orange County, you can do, AB 1482 substantial remodel evictions and get people out quickly and efficiently. If people aren't paying, you can evict. And so there are political cities based on politics that are much easier to operate in than others. And there are also states that are obviously much easier to operate in than others too. And it's something, as you change, grow, expand, reposition your portfolio, that's definitely worth considering, because I don't think certain states and cities are going to, give back things that they've already have. So it's just going to become harder to operate in those cities. And unless you want to get more management intensive, and unless you have a larger scale where you're willing to, invest that time, energy, and effort in working within that system, it's probably easier to find a place where management is, supported, property ownership is supported, versus, property ownership is a hindrance or difficult.
Hey, Jason, talk for a second, or maybe tell a quick story. You've got a lot of very high net worth clients. Some like we have on the call, maybe some a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, but high net worth individuals that are really looking at this both from a resident standpoint, but also from their income real estate or income producing real estate standpoint, and moving money, whether it's success stories that people have, or is it surprising the volume of people that or moving to Tennessee or Texas, and then also moving their real estate to Colorado or Florida or wherever it may be.
So it's happening more than you'd think. I would say I have a few clients that they have such a big machine that operates within, let's say, LA and Orange County apartments, that they can feed the machine and they're just more efficient at it than anybody else. And so it works for them. But the majority are moving real estate investments outside of the state of California for a couple reasons. One, if they do intend over time to move outside of California themselves personally, it takes their income generation outside of California. And so therefore California can't tax it. If they continue to own and operate the buildings in California, but they were living in Texas, which is an income tax-free state, they're still paying California taxes on the income generated in California. The other benefit is it just makes it easier to operate. There's population growth in those places, there's expansion, and there's government and political environments that make it easier to own the building, operate the building, manage, increase rents, evict people when things aren't going well. And so many of them have found that they're getting better returns or similar returns to what they were getting in California, and their investment feels safer. We have a lot of people moving across the South. Florida, Texas, Tennessee are obvious choices because of the zero income tax, but there's a lot of investment happening in other states across the South because it's just a political environment that's friendly to property and business owners.
Yeah, and I think that friendly to business part is really maybe even the biggest factor. I mean, I was out in Tennessee earlier in the year and met with a property manager and brought up the idea of rent control. And, in LA, they would laugh at you if you brought up, if you were surprised that LA had rent or didn't have rent control. It was exactly the opposite in Tennessee. It was almost like she laughed at me at the idea that there would be some sort of rent control. And that's on the multifamily side. But even beyond that, the effort of, government in Tennessee, counties, cities, the state, to attract business and make it exciting and profitable to do business there, that it's filling up commercial spaces. It's requiring new shopping centers. It's, the demand for office. It's not just the office for Oracle or some large corporation, but there's a lot of attorneys that need to have an office around Oracle because that's their business or whatever it may be. So it's not just the big company that maybe fuels the demand, but there's a lot of commerce and moving there, probably on a bigger scale or maybe more impactful than even just the people wanting to move outside of California for their income tax purposes.
Well, Justin, you bring up a great point, because there's when Toyota moved its headquarters from California to Dallas, Texas, or outside of Dallas, Texas, it moved 25,000 employees. They estimated that actually moved a total of 100,000 people, though, because the average family in their estimation had 4 people. But it didn't just create an opportunity for, Toyota, right? There's those 100,000 people need dry cleaners, grocery stores. They need people to, service providers to clean houses, and they need, restaurants to go eat at, and they need doctors. And so it creates this huge opportunity as companies move into environments. You mentioned, Oracle moving into Tennessee and building a facility. You have companies moving in, Tesla moved to Austin, Texas. Oracle re-headquartered to Austin, Texas. You have companies moving out of California to Texas, Florida, Tennessee because of the business environment. And people don't think about all the other jobs that are created by a company moving there that aren't actually associated with the company. And it just creates then more renters for apartments or, owners for houses. So it's a great opportunity and to look where, businesses are moving.
Want to go to the next one? I'll let you take this one. I say it all the time, but
I think that there's a common misconception that I can't take my older building that I've really appreciated and value and turn it into something better, right? Or turn it into something. I don't necessarily think better is always the right word, because what you own is great, but there's an opportunity to turn it into something that's newer, has less maintenance, maybe is outside of certain rent control restrictions, right? You go from, LA to, LARSO to just, Orange County AB 1482. Well, there's this year a 7% increase in what you can raise rent. That's if LA ever lets you increase rents. And so, or you can go from an older building into a brand new construction Chick-fil-A. There's a lot of opportunities, and you're going to get the same, similar, or even better returns on your capital and your equity, and oftentimes probably even a safer return. So it's worth sitting down with your advisor to look at, how can I take advantage of all the equity I've built up and turn it into something, that's generational to pass on, or that I'm happy and comfortable holding for the next 10 to 15 years.
I'll talk for a second. There's a picture there of a couple buildings, and I'm a kid of the 80s, so I love my Showtime Lakers, and you can see on the slide Kurt Rambis for Michael Jordan. There are times in the market where you can take your Kurt Rambis card and trade it for Michael Jordan, and it seems crazy, but the market just works that way. Those pictures on the bottom, the building on the left in black and white is a building in North Long Beach that traded 3 or 4 times, had some housing violations on it from the previous owner. Our client bought it, made a little money on it. We showed what their return on equity was, and they ended up buying the property on the right, which was in Venice, totally turnkey, and they made more money day one. There are those sort of opportunities, and that's what our people really, where we're most valuable, is helping an owner take a look at exactly where their situation is at and figure out what opportunities are available to them. As Jason said, sitting on it and keeping it is certainly, it's not going to be bad. It historically hasn't been bad, but sometimes that it's not bad keeps people from doing great. And so taking a look at these things, exploring these opportunities and the variety of other investment strategies that we're exposed to allow people to get better buildings, make more money in a shorter period of time, and use real estate to retire faster.
Well, and Justin, a good deal story here is we had a client that we helped last year. We sold a 4-plex of theirs and a single family home. They were struggling to collect the rent on the single family home. They had 2 people not paying rent on the 4-plex. And then they were struggling to collect rents on the other 2 units of the 4-plex. And they turned that into a Taco Bell and a Pizza Hut, both of which have paid their rent on time every month, and they're making, they weren't collecting much rent, so they're making infinitely more than they were, but they're making really nice, substantial, stable cash flow because they bought these so long ago. The equity built up, and someone was willing to come in do the work, evict the tenants, maybe remodel the house, sell it to an owner occupier. And then on the 4-unit, they'd evict the people, redo the units, make them nice, place in high quality tenants, and then either hold it or sell it. And so that's just an easy example where they built up their equity and then they turned it into something that now they do no work and they have really great credit tenants.
This slide that we've got on now, which we call the most important metric, which is return on current equity. The story that Jason's telling about that client who takes the house in the small multifamily building and rolls it into two things that put a lot more money in their mom's pocket is really the return on equity analysis at work. It starts with, hey, our tenants aren't paying. What do we do? How do we get them out? We really don't like all the effort we have to do to these things. That's where it starts. And then they talked with Jason. Jason introduced us to him, and we said, okay, well, that's one thing. But how much money are you really making? Not how much money are you making on your original investment, and not how much money are you making before taxes, but how much money are you making at the end of the day after we pay the expenses, the loans, you use depreciation, and you pay.
I think we might have lost Justin there for a second, but I think the point being is we were looking at it, and their actual return on their current equity value in the property was, less than 1%, sub 1%. So what we ended up turning that into was, 5.5% return cap rates from credit tenants, national tenants, on cash flowing assets, and the client couldn't be happier. Justin, sorry, we lost you. So I picked up for you and finished the story.
You took it right from where I was at. For those of you on the call that haven't seen us do this yet for you, your simple checkup about whether your return on equity is where it should be is that if you've owned a long time, 7+ years, and you haven't refinanced recently, 5+ years, without a doubt, we can show you what your return on equity is and that you could be making more money with something else. So I don't know exactly what Jason said when we got disconnected, but what we try to do is take everything into account, including those low property taxes because you bought the building 20 years ago, and still look at, even though you bought it 20 years ago for $1 million, now that it's worth $5 million and you've got no loan on it, how much money are you making on that $5 million, and could you do better? Jason told you the example of where somebody, 5X's their return. It's not always 5X. It can be in the right scenarios, but it's always a positive when we look at these numbers and somebody's held the property for a while, doesn't have a lot of depreciation, large equity. There's lots of ways that not only can you financially do better, but as Jason started the whole thing, you can also operationally make things easier and better as well. So we hope that when it comes to retiring faster, that you start looking at the most important metric, which is the return on your current equity. If you haven't looked at it, you want somebody to look at, we got a lot of great people and advisors that'll help you do that today. And then they'll also help you look at what it's going to be like over the next 10 years and what you can do better. So we encourage you to start looking at it that way. That's the way I would say that people with the largest portfolios and most successful investors look at how is their money performing now, and what they can do with the property versus what they can do with something else in making their investment decisions. We're going to move now into, I've got property, I maybe don't love it. How do I get out of this thing? What can I do? And so this is retiring from your real estate, and we're going to give you a bunch of different strategies. The first one is the monetized installment sale. This has been around as long as, if not longer than, the 1031 exchange, but far less used as it relates to real estate, but a lot more with business assets. What you are able to do is create an installment sale in which you get the money up front and the taxes ultimately aren't due until the year of the sale. So if I set up an installment sale with Jason where I'm going to give him $100,000 a year for 20 years, the sale doesn't occur until the 20th year. Jason gets the gain each year, the 100,000, and ultimately the sale doesn't record until 20 years. He may be gone, which is one of the things that people like about it. But there's a lot of ways that you can use the monetized installment sale. We can show you what those numbers look like. And it's an interesting strategy that you can do a little research on to uncover why people do it and how they can do it within the IRS guidelines, standards, rules. There's probably billions of dollars transacted every year in monetized installment sales across the country on business assets and real estate. Jason, any comments on the monetized installment sale?
No, I think it's an interesting opportunity. We've actually had some clients that we've been discussing them with recently, even potentially in real estate situations where we saw it actually in the real estate was the client was a general partner in a property. He earned all sweat equity. So his sale was all capital gain. And he wasn't sure if he wanted to do op zone. He was potentially thinking 1031 exchange, but saw the market coming, saw the rates changing, was like, I'm not sure there's a property I want to get into. And he was like, well, maybe we'll look at structuring a monetized installment sale so I can get some liquidity sooner and faster, but still, defer my gain down the road. So in the right situation, it's an interesting opportunity and something we should definitely discuss. But there's also other strategies we're going to go through now too that you'll probably end up utilizing more regularly.
Charitable remainder trust, Jason.
So a charitable remainder trust is a gift of cash or some form of, real or personal property to an irrevocable trust. When you gift the property to the irrevocable trust, essentially you're generating an income stream with the requirement of leaving a certain portion of that property at the end to a charity. I believe the minimum is 10% of that property has to go to the charity. But what it does is over the time that the, beneficiary or the donor, or you can actually do it for, not if you're donating it yourself, you can have a beneficiary be a third party other than yourself. It creates a tax benefit where the charitable trust reduces over time. There's a principal left at the end that goes to the charity. The charity gets that benefit, but it creates tax advantages short term on the cash flow for whoever the beneficiary is.
Excellent. Now we'll do the flip side of it. So on the remainder trust, the donor gets the income and the charity gets the asset. Lead trust is just the opposite, right?
Correct. You're donating payments to a charity at set amounts of time. After that period expires, then the remainder of the items, the remainder of the principal or the remainder of the assets go to the beneficiary instead. So it's in cash flow to the charity, principal or equity back to the beneficiary.
Seller carryback. What do you think, Jason? We see a little bit more of these going forward?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of these actually, because if there's a situation where someone sells a property and they're not ready to pay the taxes, maybe they don't necessarily want a 1031 exchange, and interest rates are at 6 or 7%, and you as the seller are happy with a 5% return, you can carry back a loan at 5%. You'll make your annual 5% on your money. It'll be secured by your real estate that you used to own and now no longer own, but you're the lender against, and you defer the main portion of the principal. So the amount you're carrying back, you defer the taxes on that until it's paid back. The only taxable items for you would be the interest payments, but again, you're paying interest on, what a 5% return, or taxes on that 5% interest instead of paying taxes on the principal right away. And then there's, potential benefits of your estate inheriting a note over time as well that they get pretty complicated, but there are real benefits long-term as well in that situation.
Tristan, talk for a second, because, I think that we have a number of clients that they're ready to move on from real estate. They may not want to buy the out-of-state net lease property for whatever reason. And a seller carryback installment sale sort of scenario might be a good one, because it'll provide more return maybe than the net lease property that they could buy or some of their other alternatives. But typically what holds people back from even considering these is they might have to take the property back. As a real estate attorney, talk a little bit about maybe how complicated, how complex that is, and is it worth the fear that goes along with what could be the worst case scenario?
So I don't think that there should be a ton of fear around it. The worst case, so the worst case scenario is the loan goes into default, right? In these situations, you're going to get a still like a normal size down payment, right? So if you're, a normal lender is going to give 70% loan to value, you still have 30% that you're getting right away as the down payment. So you have, and before the building becomes upside down, you'd have to have it go down 30% in value. That's a pretty substantial decrease, and I don't think we've seen that in a really long time. So you're protected on your equity standpoint. If you put the loan into default, there's two options. One's going to be a foreclosure. The foreclosures can be fairly efficient. They're usually about 90 to 120 days if there's no challenge to the foreclosure. The worst case scenario is the borrower files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then there's about a year bankruptcy process. You'll end up with the property. It'll take you about a year. But again, at that point, if somebody buys it at the bankruptcy sale, you get to include all the deferred interest, you get to include all the fees, all your costs, all of that would get paid back to you if someone bought the property for what you were owed. If not, you get the property back, and it's very unlikely that all those costs added up will be 30%. So you'll still be, profitable on the loan. You'll actually get the property back for probably well less than what it's actually worth.
Tax loss harvesting. Somebody wants to utilize their real estate. They want to get out of it. How do they combine their real estate with some tax loss harvesting to pay no tax?
All right. So let's say, for example, you have a piece of real estate and you made $500,000 on it. And let's say you were invested in the stock market, and over the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, when it's declined substantially, you lost $500,000. You could actually sell your publicly traded securities at a loss of $500,000. That loss would then offset the $500,000 gain that you make on your real estate. Oftentimes you'll hear people that have, fairly sophisticated portfolio managers tell people when they see a market dip and you take a loss, they'll actually sell that asset. Even if they want to hold that asset again long-term, they'll sell it so they can book the loss. Then a month later, they'll buy that asset back. Generally, it's not going to spike back up in a month. They'll buy that asset back so that they can ride the wave back up if they believe in it, but they're able to take that booked loss and offset other income.
So I can sell my $500,000, count it against my real estate, and then go buy my stocks back.
Correct.
Buying with your IRA. We had a fun chat about this earlier today.
I think so. This was something I learned about actually after I started practicing. And as some of you know, I grew up around real estate, so I've been around it my whole life. And I didn't know that this was a thing you can do, but you can actually buy or lend money you can use your IRA to buy real estate, or you can use it to make loans on real estate as well. And so if you believe that, having your IRA funds currently in the stock market, given where, it might be heading, is not the safest bet, and you prefer to put it into real estate, there are ways to actually take your IRA money and invest it by buying properties.
Yeah, for people that already got some money in real estate, obviously, it's going to stay there. Maybe use an exchange, maybe use some of these other strategies. But on a go-forward basis, if you're going to work on building a portfolio, doing it through your IRA might be more effective than just putting, let's call it, fresh cash into a deal. Maybe our favorite?
I think the opportunity zones are the most interesting and great thing out there right now from a real estate investment standpoint. I was on the phone today with someone talking about it, and they're going to be putting money into an opportunity fund, and they referred to it as like the Goldilocks of investments. It just doesn't seem real when you start to factor in getting all this accelerated depreciation, plus the cash flow, plus tax-free appreciation, and deferral of payment of capital gains tax. There's so many benefits here. I've even started talking to clients potentially that, if you own a very large amount of real estate and you have some with low basis and you're worried about the elimination of 1031, now might be the time to sell it, put the gains all into an op zone fund, and then have us try to find and target certain assets instead, where we can really get you a lot of depreciation to lower that actual tax bill. But then, these benefits also pass on to your estate. So it's a really interesting strategy. And Justin, we talk about it all the time, but it's probably my favorite out there right now. I'm actually personally hoping that they extend it beyond 26 for the acquisition period.
I would say it's my favorite right now. And I think it's probably my favorite right now is because you and I have done a fair amount of business in this and are growing our work in it. And every single time we talk to somebody's attorney, their accountant, their tax advisor, everybody goes, really? We're going to do what? And we facilitated the transaction. They get control of the property where they don't have to buy it in a multi-person fund that they can self-direct, and are super satisfied. Cash flow, they'll get some appreciation, they get deferral, they get tax avoidance. The numbers are really astounding on it. And so if you have a gain that comes from, you just sold an ape, one of those bored apes, or you sold, that Michael Jordan rookie card, or even maybe a piece of real estate where you have a big gain in it. It's worth exploring.
Also, guys, if you're an investor in a real estate transaction, right, where you were just a passive investor, let's call it a limited partner, and that partnership is having an exit and has exited, and you got a K1 with a capital gain, you can take that money now and reverse it right back into your own, self-directed opportunity zone fund. And so that's something people don't think about all the time. Was like, well, man, our fund, our real estate investment deal, we can't 1031 exchange because of all the partners. That's okay. Like, you can take that money and roll it right back into real estate. That's actually what we've done with a few of our clients. Was they know real estate, they're into real estate. They actually had an opportunity fund going from other things. And then they said, hey, I got some K1s from some exits on some apartment buildings we just invested in passively that did really well. Can I put that in my opportunity zone fund? And I go, is it a capital gain? And they said, yes. And I go, absolutely. So they can come from sale of stocks as well.
DSTs, certainly an alternative for somebody who wants to get out of the day-to-day of operating real estate. DSTs, for those of you that have been around a little bit, it's what used to be a tenant in common, a very passive form of investing, usually large shopping centers, office buildings, multifamily, of which you can, put in between 50,000 and a couple $1 million. Sponsors operate the property, usually a 5, 7, or 10-year hold. Very passive. You're going to get a check every month. Those are kind of the pros of it, is you don't have to do all that active management. And usually where these assets are being acquired, they're more cash flow driven assets. So good for retirement, for somebody who needs cash flow in retirement and maybe doesn't need capital growth as much as they need cash flow. Downsides of it, you have no control. There's a certain period of time that the entity will own the property, and you're in it to win it for as long as that goes, and you don't have any control or say in the operations or the expenses or the costs or the fees or anything that go along with it. But we do see some people invest in the higher return assets, and then we also see sometimes people go very high quality. You might have been a mom and pop investor that never could have owned the Empire State Building or South Coast Plaza, but DSTs allow people the vehicle to get into very high quality assets as well, and be a passive investor in those. Anything you want to add on that one?
No, they're interesting opportunities. I think if you can afford to buy your own deal, I would buy my own deal, just because the fees get high. You don't have control. But the one place I've recommended to people potentially to look at those is, like, if you're doing a 1031 exchange and you might have a little bit of money left over, right? Like, we call it boot, but like you have a couple $100,000 that your math just doesn't add up. You can always name that as like your last replacement property. And they'll take 200,000 or 300,000 of your money. It's not enough to buy a property, but they'll take it, and it saves you from having to pay tax on those funds. Some clients are just, give me the cash, I'll pay the tax on a few $100,000. So I think that's the place that I like it used the most, but I just worry about fees sometimes. But if you really want to own an Amazon warehouse and you can't buy it by yourself, there you go. Next
one we're going to talk about is buying real estate through private placement insurance. Jason talked about using your IRA. This is really just a more sophisticated, and usually for the highest of high net worth individuals. But setting up your own insurance product where you direct the investment of the funds in the insurance policy to invest in real estate. It's very sophisticated. It's used a lot on Wall Street with investment in companies and stocks and things like that. And it's just starting to grow in real estate as another investment vehicle that you can utilize. Jason, you had any experience with this yet?
We've done a handful of them now, and we're starting to do more. It's a really good estate planning strategy. And so I'm happy to sit down and talk about it. It gets pretty detail oriented, but there's an opportunity if you're high net worth or high income earner. It's really good for, passing assets down to children, things like that. You can really direct the investments. We've had people even, by the way, Justin, when they're like starting a startup, but they know it's going to be really successful because they've had a lot of success in the past, they'll use some of that money to invest into the company on behalf of their kids, so that it gets all the growth and appreciation, and they're essentially tax-free as the insurance policy. So.
Cashing out, paying the tax bill.
It's always an option. You can always pay your taxes.
So. It is an option. And, I think, Jason, as we discussed, there's some options if you do want to pay the tax bill, how to defer some of that tax bill and then avoid future investment gain. Right. Certainly utilizing opportunity zones. There are also, the point could be made that if you're on the fence about where the market's headed or how long you want to work on the property, that doing it now and just cashing out, paying the capital gains tax at what I think a lot of people believe will be the lowest we'll see capital gains, for a while, it is not a bad strategy if you think that rates are going to go up 100 basis points by September and another 100 basis points by the end of the year. Really, what somebody might be paying in taxes is less than how much their property might have gone down.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think paying the tax isn't always an option, especially if you need or want the liquidity. The liquidity will give you flexibility. It's just sad sometimes to have to realize how much you have to pay.
Well, it is sad to sometimes have to pay the taxes. The good news is you must have been pretty successful and made a lot of money in order to have to pay taxes.
That is true.
And if you're not gonna own it till you die, which that is one of the strategies in here, is own it till you die and leave it to your kids, or after a stepped up basis, or hopefully still a stepped up basis, depending on some of the proposals we've seen over the last couple of years. It's not a bad strategy to do right now. I've been in the business now 20 some odd years, and there weren't many, but there were a few people that in 2007 and early 2008 were liquidating their portfolios because they felt like change was going to happen soon. And they liquidated portfolios, they paid the tax, and 24 to 36 months later, all of that after-tax money was back in real estate, and they hit some home runs over the last 10, 12 years. So not necessarily always a bad strategy, and it can help you retire. And if you've made enough money, enjoy it, right? For those of you that maybe don't want to pay Uncle Sam, but you don't want to have what you have right now. It's now far away. It's older. It's deferred maintenance. It's too much work, too much headache. You don't like managing the management company. There's the 1031 exchange. Millions of these have been done since the early 70s, when the Starker exchange really kind of got the rubber stamp from the IRS. The strategy to handle it simultaneously is something we execute in almost 80% of our transactions. But it is the great opportunity to defer the tax, continue to kick the can forward, but in addition to that, improve something. We worked with a quick story. We had a client that we worked with a few years ago that had 6 units of 20s construction in Santa Ana. They had no more depreciation. They were in a 100% equity position, and they were making about 2% on their money. With the help of one of our advisors, they took that, they traded it into 9 units of 70s construction in Anaheim. For those of you that don't follow Orange County rent control, Santa Ana now has some of the most restrictive rent control in California. They moved their equity out of there. They moved it into Anaheim. They bought the property for $2.1 million a little over 2 years ago. Now, because they're moving to Texas, because they've had enough of what's happening in California, they're going to sell that asset for over $3 million and redeploy all of their equity into an asset in Texas where they make even more cash flow. So the age of their property over 2 exchanges is going to go probably from 1920 to 1990 or 2010. Their cash flow is going to more than double, and the number of units that they control and the shelter that they get through depreciation is significant. So not only can it be a great financial tool, but it can really be a lifestyle tool as well to make things better.
And Justin, I think that this is something where this is a perfect opportunity to talk about it, but reach out to your advisor, sit down, bring your information on your portfolio and let them help you analyze it, right? Like this isn't something you have to do on your own. You don't have to go at this alone. You have, really qualified people that are here to help you, and they'll sit and analyze it with you. And they might actually tell you that where you're at is the perfect position and what you're holding is the best thing you can hold. And that's okay. But, oftentimes we might look at it and say, here's something that's less headache, same return, or here's something that's same headache, better return, right? And so everybody ends up with something that they're happier with than what they have now.
All right, and we'll get to our last one, and I'm going to let you do this one because there is no worse call you make as an investment real estate broker than when you call somebody that you've talked to for a long time and you ask for them and they're no longer with us. It always bummed me out. It always made me sad. I guess maybe the one positive is for somebody who's held the real estate long enough, what they're able to pass along to their family and talk a little bit about how they can, how this plays into it.
Right. So when you pass away, unfortunately, or when somebody in your family passes away, you do get a step up in basis. Additionally, there's opportunities where, depending on the size of your estate will transfer to your heirs at a tax-free, income. There's no estate tax. It's currently $11.7 million per individual. Married couples, and therefore could do $23.4 million collectively to their heirs. That's a sizable amount of money, but many people that we know don't always consider themselves wealthy, but they bought a bunch of real estate over time, and it's just grown in value. And they don't think about it. They just kind of think about the cash flow and this is what I own. But, they're able to pass these properties on, at a tax beneficial way because of those things. It's sad and unfortunate to think about, but there is a substantial tax savings for, the individuals. So,
is there one more slide? Or did we finish?
I think there's a couple.
Glad we had a couple more. People can certainly give it away, right? If you want to retire from real estate, what's the benefit if you do that?
If you give it away, you get a charitable deduction, and that offsets any money you make. Again, if we're going to do that, let's do like a charitable remainder trust or some of those other things. It's totally okay to leave assets. But there's plenty of ways to do it that, can still benefit you and benefit the charity of your choice.
I think the last one we're going to talk about is living it. I'm going to tell everybody about a really interesting strategy that I'm watching somebody work right now. So they spent 15 or 20 years buying multifamily, ultimately grew their portfolio into 20 units, sold it for about $5 million. And what their plan is right now is to do exchanges, buy a house, rent it out for a little bit, move into it, fix it up, sell the house and the piece of the investment real estate that they bought, do the same thing take the proceeds from the house ownership out tax-free, and then continue to downsize by buying new houses to rent out and then live in for the remainder of their life to pull out as much of the money tax-free as possible. I think it's the coolest strategy. There's going to be a lot of moving around, but when it comes to figuring out ways to avoid the tax, get out of the real estate, it's kind of like a nice little, paycheck every once in a while when they sell these houses, no lump sum, and they're going to work their way down to have the smallest amount of investment real estate possible. What do you think, Jason?
And the most expensive house that they can. This works, but you can't go into it with the pure intent of moving in and making it your primary residence, right? 1031 exchanges are all about intent. So you have to buy the property with the intent of it being investment real estate. You'll buy it, improve it, rent it out, however that works. And then over time, your intent can change. You can, buy it and say, look, the market's not great. I got this equity saved up in my house. I'd rather move into this house that I own. While you bought it a while back with a 1031, you can change your intent. Once you change your intent and you live in it for a few years, then you, and if you have a spouse, would get the benefit of the $500K tax-free appreciation, which you could then sell. And then you would sell that house, buy another house, or, sell that house, put the money in your pocket, and then, have a potential another 1031 house down the road that you intent might change on and you decide to move in because, you wanted to pocket the profits off your other house and it was the right financial strategy for you.
Any closing comments? We've gone a little over an hour because of a couple technical difficulties. But any closing comments about utilizing real estate to retire and or retiring from someone's real estate?
I think that there's a lot of opportunities out there right now. I know people are a little bit nervous, but either, I say this a lot, but to reposition your portfolio. The other thing is, and Justin, you've made a few interesting comments today about taking advantage of opportunities and being willing to pull the trigger on those opportunities themselves. I'll say a quick deal story. We have a client that bought a piece of land in 2013. It's 27 acres out in San Bernardino or Riverside. And their plan was to build like an outdoor concert amphitheater and a place for an indoor arena for concerts. And then the whole market didn't really work and they didn't think it was going to be great. But that property, all of a sudden, it was at the corner of two major freeways, became really valuable for industrial real estate builds. A year ago, they came to me and they said, we have a bunch of offers potentially in the $90 million range. They bought the property for $5 million about 12 years ago. And they said, we have offers for 90 million. I say, great. They're like, but the family can't agree on what to do. And we're not sure what we're going to exchange it into. And, we keep arguing or whatever. Well, they came back to me about a month ago and they said, the city decided to change our zoning and regulation. The industrial market for these really, really large scale Amazon deals, after Amazon said that they don't want as much industrial space, kind of spooked all the REITs that were going to do the stuff. And then the rates went up and now they have offers in the mid 30s on their property. While a 7x return is great over 12 years, they screwed up an 18x return in the same time period. So take advantage of opportunities right now. If you see them, pull the trigger. If you can add a little bit more debt and still make it work and the numbers are right, do that. Create more depreciation for yourself. Take advantage. There's going to be really good opportunities out here. And a lot of people are nervous, but I think there's going to be some great chances to, reposition and work with your advisor on it. They know better than everybody. They sit and stare at all these deals all day long. They'll be able to advise you on what's best.
Thanks, Jason. I think those are great comments. I'll close with, I think there's what we all hope will happen in the market. And then there's probably what's likely to happen. And, as Jason said, we spend all day, every day in front of a lot of data, talking to a lot of different people. And my encouragement would be is no matter what you hope would happen in the market and what you hope the value of your property is today or will be tomorrow, is that you get as much information possible about what is likely to happen so you can make the most profitable strategy. Sometimes the most profitable strategy is making money on your building. Other times the most profitable strategy is not losing as much as possible, or retaining as much as possible and losing as little. There's a bunch going on. Hopefully we gave you some ideas and some strategies today that are intriguing that you may want to explore, and we'd love to help you. I'm intrigued to know of all these things that we went through, what's the most intriguing to everybody who's been watching this, and you can please tell me at justin.white@centadv.com. And we'd love to see, what you think is maybe the most intriguing strategy and help you explore it, and maybe 3 or 4 others to see if something's right to do right now, or if sitting tight and doing nothing is the best strategy. We're happy to help you figure that out and tell you whatever we think is the best outcome. Jason, it's always a pleasure to do this with you. Thanks so much for being a part of what we do and being a contributor for our clients and for everybody on our team. Hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and I'm sure we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks about what we see in the marketplace. Have a great evening.